When the world fights over a resource, somebody quietly gets rich. Not the miners, not the governments. And here's what surprised me. They aren't cheating. No inside tip, no leaked memo, nothing illegal. They just read public information faster than everyone else. This is a real documented mechanism. It even has a name, information arbitrage. So I went looking for how an ordinary person could use it. Instead, I found a study, and it says something uncomfortable. In this game, the ordinary investor isn't the one collecting the profit. He's the one paying it. Let me show you the machine. Then I'll show you which side of it you're standing on. Right now, the world is fighting over critical minerals, lithium, rare earths, the materials inside your phone, your car, and every missile built this decade. And there's a clock ticking on all of it. In late 2025, China and the United States struck a truce on rare earth export controls. That truce expires in November 2026. It might just get extended. Nobody knows. That's the whole point. But if it lapses, the International Energy Agency ran the numbers. $6.5 trillion of production at risk every year outside China. That's an estimate of exposure, not a prediction. But it tells you the size of the board. Governments know this. The big funds know this. But most people won't react until a headline tells them to. And that gap between what is true and what gets reported is where the money is made. So here's my promise. First, I'll show you exactly how that gap gets exploited, the old version and the new one. Then I'll show you who's actually on the losing end of it, because the research is blunt about that, and it's not who you'd guess. Start with the story everyone tells. June 1815, Napoleon meets Wellington at Waterloo. Whoever wins decides the value of British government bonds. The legend says the banker Nathan Rothschild learned the result first, that he faked a panic, crashed the market, then bought the bottom. That story is a lie. It was invented decades later, in a pamphlet, and it was built to be anti-Semitic. Historians have taken it apart, piece by piece. But here's what most people do next. They retreat to a softer version of the same lie. They say, fine, but he still had a secret courier network. He still knew first. The archive says no. There's no evidence he set up any special channel to get the Waterloo result. He wasn't the first man in London to know. Someone else was. He was simply one of several people who got private word before the official dispatch arrived. So why am I spending your time on a story that didn't happen? Because the myth got exactly one thing right, and everything else wrong. The Rothschilds really did run the fastest private courier network in Europe. It was so fast and so famous that people assumed it had to be cheating. It wasn't cheating. It was infrastructure. And that's the real mechanism. Not a secret, just speed. Now let me show you someone who did it cleanly and left receipts. 35 years later, a man named Paul Reuter found a gap. Europe was wiring itself with telegraph, but the lines didn't quite meet. There was a hole between Brussels and Aachen, about 100 kilometers of nothing. So Reuter filled that hole with 45 carrier pigeons. They crossed it in 2 hours. The mail train took 6. That pigeon service became the Reuters news agency. It still exists today. Nothing hidden, nothing stolen. He just moved the same public prices faster than anyone else. This is information arbitrage. It isn't stealing a secret. It's closing a gap in time. The gap between an event happening and everyone else finding out. Remember that word, gap. It comes back at the end of this video. 200 years later, the pigeons became satellites. And here's the study I mentioned. It's the heart of this whole video. Public companies report their sales once every 3 months. Researchers at Berkeley asked a simple question. What if you could estimate those sales early? So they got hold of 4.8 million satellite photos of parking lots, 67,000 stores, 44 major American retailers. And it worked. The cars in those lots predicted the earnings before the company announced anything. Trading on that signal paid 4 to 5% in the 3 days around each report. Annualize a return like that, and the number is staggering. Now notice what did not happen here. Nobody broke a law. A parking lot is a public place. Anyone can look at it. Somebody just looked at all of them, at scale, faster than the market did. And one detail from that study is going to matter later, so hold on to it. The signal worked better on the way down than on the way up. An emptying parking lot predicted bad news more reliably than a full one predicted good news. In other words, this data is best at spotting failure early. Remember that. It tells you what these funds were actually doing with it. Now scale that up, from one store to an entire economy. Take oil. Most governments hide their real inventories. China releases almost nothing. So funds measure the shadows inside oil storage tanks, from space. As the oil level drops, the floating roof sinks, and the shadow inside changes shape. Read the shadow, and you can estimate what a country is really holding. So here's the rule that runs this whole industry. The darker a market is, the bigger the prize for whoever can see inside it. None of it is secret. All of it is just faster. But now here's the part that made me sit up, because a satellite can't see through a cloud. When the sky over those oil tanks is overcast, the watchers go blind. So two researchers asked a strange question. Does the weather over an oil field move the price of oil? Not because weather affects oil, it doesn't, not there, but because clouds decide whether anyone can see the tanks at all. They tracked cloud cover over 8 major American storage sites using NASA satellite data, and they found it. A cloudier week meant lower oil returns the week after. Now that sounds insane, so they tried to break their own result. They ran the same test on the years before satellite oil data existed. The clouds predicted nothing. They ran it on cloud cover at night, when the tank shadows can't be read anyway. The effect vanished again. So it isn't the weather, it isn't trader mood. It is purely, specifically, the fact that clouds blind the satellites. Sit with that for a second. The weather over Cushing, Oklahoma moves the oil market, not because it touches a single barrel, but because it decides who gets to see. That's how deep this data is buried inside the machine now. Now stop. Because you're probably thinking what I thought. Isn't this just insider trading? It's a fair question, and the answer matters more than anything else in this video. There is a hard line in the law. On one side sits material non-public information. A tip from an executive, a leaked document, a number the public simply cannot get. Trading on that is a crime. People go to prison for it. But on the other side sits public data, a satellite photo, a shipping record, an export filing on a government website. Anyone can buy it, anyone can read it. Reading it faster than the crowd is not a crime. It's just work. There is a gray zone though, and this is where people get destroyed. Some funds pay expert networks to connect them with people inside a company. Sometimes those calls drift into information the public was never meant to have. That's where a clever edge turns into a federal case. So the disciplined operators only touch data anyone could, in theory, go get. It's slower, it's harder, but it never puts them in a courtroom, which brings us to the part that actually matters. Who wins and who pays? So bring all of that to the resource war happening right now. First, understand what a modern resource war even is. It isn't tanks fighting over an oil field. It's tariffs, sanctions, export licenses, control of the choke points. The weapon isn't a bomb, the weapon is scarcity itself, and one country holds most of that weapon. The exact figures are estimates, and they move. But the shape is not in dispute. China mines around 60% of the world's magnet rare earths, but it refines over 90% of them, and it makes almost 95% of the world's permanent magnets. Refining is the choke point. Plenty of countries can dig up ore. Almost nobody else can turn it into something useful. So when China tightens the tap, prices move. And we've already watched it happen. Take antimony. It's in ammunition, in flame retardants, in night vision. In August 2024, China restricted exports of it. By December, it banned them to America outright. Watch what the price did. $9.80 a pound in August, $18.10 by December, $27.50 by the following June. Nearly tripled in under a year. And America did start mining its own. It didn't help. U.S. dependence on imported antimony went up, not down. 91%. That's how deep a choke point runs. You can't drill your way out of it in a year. After the rare earth controls, American imports of yttrium collapsed too, from 333 tons down to 17. Aerospace manufacturers started rationing it. Some ran out entirely, and there's no way around it. China supplies 93% of the yttrium America imports, and nearly all the rest comes from concentrate that China processed anyway. And in Europe, rare earth prices climbed to as much as 6 times the Chinese price. Now remember the clock, and understand what actually comes back if that truce lapses. Not just a ban on Chinese exports, a rule reaching any product made anywhere on Earth if it contains Chinese origin rare earth material. A car built in Ohio, a turbine built in Germany. It wouldn't matter. This June, the G7 launched an emergency alliance to break the dependency. That tells you how seriously governments take this deadline. So, what does an information arbitrageur do with a clock like that? He doesn't wait for the announcement. He watches the signals underneath it. Which ports are loading and which have gone still? Which export licenses get quietly approved or denied? Which processing plant goes dark on a satellite pass weeks before anyone reports it? That's the fog of war. But over prices. During a shortage, nobody knows what a mineral is really worth. The truth takes weeks to surface. He reads the war in real time. The public reads it in the past tense. But let me be precise, because this is where people oversell it. None of this predicts a war. It can't read a president's mind. It spots physical disruptions early: ships, stockpiles, factories, cargo. That's a narrow edge. It just happens to be a valuable one. Now I have to be straight with you, because I started this video looking for the trick. And when I read that Berkeley study properly, it answered a different question. The researchers didn't just ask whether satellite data works. They asked who was standing on the other side of those trades. And the answer is you. Now remember what I told you to hold on to. The satellite signal was sharpest at spotting decline, at seeing a company fail early. So think about what you'd do with a tool like that. You wouldn't use it to find winners. You'd use it to bet against losers. And that's precisely what the data shows they did. When the parking lots emptied out, the funds quietly bet against the stock. And in that exact same window, individual investors were net buyers. Ordinary people were buying the companies the satellites said were failing. Not because they're stupid, because they could not see it. Data on short selling comes out twice a month, and it comes out late. By the time a normal person can even observe the bet is finished. It gets worse. The researchers found the market got slightly harder to trade around those reports. Spreads widened, liquidity dried up, and prices didn't get any more accurate for it. The researchers' conclusion is cold. Unequal access to this data widens the gap between sophisticated and ordinary investors. It doesn't make prices more accurate. It just moves money from one side to the other. And I want to kill a comforting idea before you reach for it. People will tell you an edge like this disappears once everyone knows about it. But look closer. The idea was never secret. Everybody knows a busy parking lot means good sales. That was never the edge. The edge is doing it to 67,000 stores at once, every single day. And that signal stayed profitable for roughly 8 years. The lead researcher says exactly why. Access to the data stayed exclusive. Here's what that access actually costs. One high-resolution satellite image, covering about 10 square miles, runs over $600. And a working strategy needs thousands of them, every year. Then you need the people who can read them. Those people are not cheap either. Barrier was never the idea. The idea is obvious. The barrier is the price of looking. In the researchers' own words, this is a gain for the investors who can pay that price, at the expense of everybody who can't. That is not a bug in the machine. That is the machine. Now, before you decide the professionals are gods, they're not. In a resource war, the biggest risk isn't misreading the data. It's reading it perfectly and getting destroyed anyway. Here's what that looks like. In October 2025, traders were positioned for a rare earth squeeze. The controls were coming. Then, on a Sunday, the US Treasury Secretary went on television. He said a deal with Beijing was expected. That was it, just a sentence. By Monday, rare earth miners were in free fall. Critical metals down 17%, Trilogy down 15%, USA Rare Earth down 12%, MP Materials down 7%. Nothing had actually happened. Nothing was signed. A man simply spoke on a Sunday show. So you could have read every satellite image on Earth correctly and still lost double digits in a day. This was never a cheat code. It's an edge, and an edge can still lose. So what do you actually do with this? Not go get the satellites? You won't. That's the honest answer. But something does change once you understand the machine. You stop treating a headline as new information. By the time it's printed, somebody already acted on it. The price knows before you do. News isn't the signal. News is the receipt. Now go back to Reuters and his pigeons. That service only lasted about a year. The telegraph companies closed the gap, the birds became useless, and that edge died. But Reuters didn't die with it. He moved to London and went looking for the next gap. That's the pattern. 200 years old, and it is never broken. The gap always closes. And a new gap always opens somewhere else. Somebody always has the faster wire. And it has never been you. That doesn't make you a victim. It makes you someone who can stop pretending the race is fair. If this changed how you see the resource wars, there's a bigger pattern underneath all of it. Watch this next. How a handful of countries turned raw materials into a weapon, in plain sight.